Welcome back to Lead Dev New York with Dev Interrupted, where we are about to have an incredible interview with Francisco Trindade.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on the show because I have to say, my wife is a huge fan of the company you work at, Braze. Francisco's a director of engineering there. Welcome to the show. And I'm excited to dive into your topic about how to make engineers work better together, which is something
Yeah.
that I think we touch on, but maybe don't directly speak to. I'd love to start with that and kind of see what the framework is that you think will help engineering teams work better together.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, I think, mostly because I think there's been like a shift in the industry in the past like decade. And then we're seeing another shift happening now. And just explaining my thinking, I think like we as an industry in terms in tech, I think we live this kind of like, maybe 10 or 20 years of just like the search for talent, right? So a lot of that was kind of like how can you grow organizations? How can you hire faster? How can you hire like train the more talent? And that, of course, led us to a position where like we have focused a lot of individuals in teams, like in how to kind of create good environments for engineers to grow and how like to kind of like let individuals flourish in teams. And if you look into material from maybe a few years ago, there's like this quote, just let the engineers do the work. That's all you have to do as a manager. And that's like kind of think some of the mentality that we had. Also, I think as an industry, I think, and rightly so, I think we have been very against like micromanagement, right? I think if you want to be a kind of going to be hired as a manager anywhere, like the only thing you cannot hint in the interview is that you're going to be like a micromanager. Right? That's like that doesn't get you a job in tech at all,
Yeah.
which is good. But I think like in that process and in that kind of like growth phase and in the process of doing it, I think we kind of like bent a bit too much to the kind of like the kind of like the other side of the thing, and we just didn't put a lot of attention, or as an industry in general, I was like, how do we make teams be effective? And I think we kind of like, we think let go of some of the learnings in the past,
Mhm.
but like to kind of help like work around teams. So a lot of like what I try to talk about and to kind of like work with teams that I work and kind of like managers that I kind of work with, are really about like focusing on effectiveness. How do you kind of like you as a manager become a leader that can like actually drive effectiveness in your team and then create an environment where your engineers can like fulfill their potential because they are in a very productive environment.
So let's say you're one of these, directors of engineering who have spent years now in an environment driven by, to your point, these enterprise companies like Google that have said, I'm going to acquire all the talent. I'm going to really just bring in folks and hold on to them. And now you're realizing you need to make the shift where, okay, I haven't spent enough time making my team as effective as they could be. How do you get started?
I think there's like three main kind of aspects that I think about. One, you need to draw like value team results of individual results. I think like
Mhm.
and that's like
Did we deliver the feature holistic as a team, or did not
exactly.
just did that PR to go well?
Yeah. And I think like I mean there's like of course like everything on this topic is a spectrum, right? Like there's not that's
Of
not right or
course,
wrong.
yeah.
And like it's just like you can go either way. But I think like there are companies and teams that focus too much in terms of like has even like in promotions and rewards of like how do you promote individuals is by individual work, right? So then you kind of focus the idea that like you disincentivize collaboration. You kind of say, oh, you have to have an idea and then write a doc and then implement it and then do everything yourself. And that is the path to be promoted. So if you do that, then of course, like people are going to, that famous quote of like, tell me how you're going to reward me and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. So the first thing I would say for like this manager or leader that's thinking about that is thinking, okay, how do you value and make your team understand that you value team results? And I think to your point is saying, okay, if we deliver a project, like have we worked together as a team to deliver the project? And like how would we value the different roles in that team, right? Like maybe there is someone gonna lead, be the technical lead or be the manager or be like the whatever function they are doing, but all these functions matter, right? Like if you are the person just code reviewing what like
But you're really good at
but
that.
you're really
Like,
good at that, like
yeah.
that's value. If you're like so I think there's that concept like glue work, right? Like people talk about the thing like yes, and there are some engineers that are like good at that they're good at like making work move and like helping the code reviews and helping with QA and helping you with like kind of like pairing and
They help every
collaborating.
other
They
engineer
help
be 5% more efficient,
exactly,
10% more efficient.
and they
Yeah,
have that's value, right?
totally.
So I think that's the first thing, like results and kind of like and help teams understand that and engineers understand that. I think the second thing I kind of like talk about is understand. the system or the process like the systems and the process in plural that your team has, right? So I think any work goes from like someone's like being it's an idea somewhere, like to then a process that can take weeks or months or years in some situations until like it gets delivered, right? And all of that, there's like time, there's people, there's work, there's bottlenecks. And I think like the more you can as a leader understand the whole picture and like talk about like there's the concept like the value stream map, right? Like in terms of
Right.
like where does it come from, where does it go to, and like what are the other phases and how long it takes and what are the challenges there. Like the more you become an expert on that, like more you can then as a leader like know where the bottlenecks are and where like the kind of like the challenges are. Because at the end, if you don't know that, like you could just be wasting your time, right? I did consulting for a long time, and like one common problem that we would face was like they will hire us to kind of say, "Oh, like we need to improve the quality of the team," and because and here you come and do this particular thing, and you realize, well, this thing takes maybe a day or two, and you're doing before like it's taking like 6 months.
Yeah.
So if you want to accelerate your delivery, like I can, of course, I can like sharpen the axe here, but like it's really not going to change much. Your money is better invested somewhere else. And as a leader, you like even in within your team, like you have those options, right? Because the thing
You
like
have
the
investment decisions to make,
yeah, you
right?
have
Like,
and even from time, like and focus, right? Like as a manager, do you
totally.
focus on like the technical aspect of your team or the people aspect or the process aspect? Like just knowing where to put your time is important. And then I think assuming you do that and you become that expert, I think that the last thing is the third, not the last, I guess, like the third part to be like be active in leading a team. I think like I've seen at this point, like I think too many cases where like managers become like passive in how the teams work, and they kind of say, well, like the engineers think that's the best way to do it,
So I'm just
and
going to let them do it.
let them do
Yeah.
it. Just like even if I know it's not, and I'm just gonna like be. I think like you need to kind of like think about like how to, of course, like including people and like in a way that's like inclusive and like helps people achieve their potential, but like how to direct the team to being effective. I think there is a you look back into like the kind of lean production system. There's a quote that says like you cannot be a change agent of a system that you're in, right? Like, and that's like the thing that we don't realize. I think if you're an engineer and you got like picking up like a ticket and writing code and like doing that, your focus is that, right? You're just like
Yeah.
you're doing that work. Like you're not thinking about like, is this the most effective way I have to do this process? Because there's things that you're not seeing, like just like because you just are not focused on that. Like your focus is I need to write the code to solve this
Right.
problem that I'm given. As a manager, your focus should be like, I need to make this team effective. And you have a better view of what's happening. So I think help driving that view in an active way is important. I think like one way I kind of like try to describe sometimes is saying like every day is like since we are in the US, I guess like we have like the American football kind of like analogy is just like every day is a new play, right? Like it's
Yeah.
just like you need to make sure that your team is making the best play they can, and that varies by day, right? One day could be like we need to all be QAing this project that we need to deliver. Next day could be like, we need to review this doc or we need to collaborate or don't like whatever that is like, but there are variations that you can need to use on a day-to-day basis.
To follow along with your metaphor, there's a famous coaching philosophy in American football about win the day, which is look, don't worry about the game next week. Don't worry about the thing you have to do in the long run. Win today, whatever that task is today, and stack those wins on top of each other. And it's a process that I see be really successful in software engineering teams too, where you succeed in what you're doing and what's in front of you and you iterate on it. And that quick iteration cycle seems to be really crucial to make successful teams and to move organizations forward. And I love that you're thinking about the incentive piece of this too. So you brought this up. There's a lot of good nuggets to unpack, but I want to zero in on the incentives and how we set them up in organizations. Because I agree with you that there are too often opportunities that get missed because individual incentive is to carry something through the whole way. And so maybe you miss opportunities to specialize people and actually make your whole organization more efficient. How would you zero in on that incentive challenge that you face in some teams and trying to fix that problem for your organization?
Yeah, I think like, I mean, you're not going to escape the fact that, you need to evaluate individuals, right? Like
Of course, yeah.
and individually, right? As well. Like, so,
Yeah.
so that's like,
But maybe not on like lines of code or something.
yeah, no, not, yeah, exactly. I think like, and that's kind of like, I think the way I would like, I've seen be more successful, I think is just like, you need to focus on impact, right? I think like that's like the driving force of the business and like the team should be like, I think the more you can like connect your team to like the impact that the team has on the business, the more that you can align everyone on that. And interesting because I think that creates that model. I think it feels sometimes a bit weird because you can say, okay, well, maybe someone did a lot of things right, but at the end the project wasn't delivered. And like that person kind of like now is going to be penalized by like the problem of others, right?
Even
And
though they're delivering a lot of value to that team.
yeah, even though they're doing some work. And then like you end up the question of like, what is value, right? And like, and I think it creates
Mm.
some interesting aspects of like your point, like maybe someone was very efficient writing a lot of code, but like that wasn't the code that needed to, like the problem that wasn't the problem that needed to be solved, right?
Yeah, if
Like,
you're going fast in the wrong direction,
yeah,
it's not going to solve the
exactly.
problem.
And also I think the interesting thing is that like, when you create this focus on like something that's like collective and value, like you kind of like create incentives to everyone to like keep self-correcting the alignment, right? Because like it becomes like now your incentive as an individual to say like, well, this project is going nowhere. I need to speak to someone about it. And I need to like raise this to like my manager or like my like whoever that is to kind of that can take action because I know that if this doesn't work, like that kind of impacts me as well, right? So might be like uncomfortable conversations, but they are like useful conversations for like the team and for everyone to just kind of like succeed. And I think like my experience of that has always been like it might be uncomfortable in some situations for like an engineer to say, well, like I'm now associated, my promise is associated to like the collective success. That is a challenge. But then like the thing is like the more you work in a productive environment, the more you are gonna grow as an individual, right? Like if I look back in my career, I think like the interesting part were like solving really hard problems with a good group of people, right?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of like what I think you try to reproduce. You want to try to reproduce it like in any team that's the effect.
And I know you have experience working across multiple regions and cultures. How has that informed your approach as you evaluate how to effectively increase efficiency for engineering teams?
There's 2 points I think that are interesting talking about. I think one is maybe so like just like where like I kind of like just like to clarify like my career like I started in Brazil and I'm from Brazil and then like I started consulting for this company ThoughtWorks in the UK and so I did that like for a few years. I moved down to Australia and then like consulted that for a few years in Australia, but then also like started my own company there and like so I had like my own startup and then I moved to the US where I joined I guess like corporate America or like the technology industry,
Welcome. Yeah.
which is, but it's just the first, I think the US was like maybe the most like formal part of that. So I think like one is just like the common, I think like what gave me insight is one is just like the common ground. I think like everyone is trying to, all these countries and also like I work in like other like, the countries for shorter periods, like there are like common elements of just like what makes a team effective, right? Like just like you and software is similar in different areas, in different projects, in different companies. And I think like it's always when you're talking about like just like maybe putting a caveat on this whole conversation. I think when you're talking about uh, team as efficient or any aspect of teams, there's always going to be the argument of like, well, every team is different, every
Sure.
situation,
Like we have to adjust.
and that is true, right? And like there's di- different teams, different company and stuff, but like there is a large, I think what my experience made me see, there's a large group of commonalities. And like when you're delivering software, like we kind of know how software should be delivered, right? Like you write high quality software, you collaborate on it, you test well, you kind of inject quality in the system, you iterate faster, and that kind of I would say a high percentage of the
Yeah.
software
The
projects
general
can be
kind of
done with that.
concepts we kind of agree with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think like answer your question, I think that's one thing. I think the experience of seeing that as commonalities across like different projects and problems and like cultures. I think the other aspect that made me that I think maybe it's like a bit more interesting is just like when people think about efficiency and process, there's usually the stereotype of like restrictive systems, right? So if you talk to someone and they say like, I hate agile or like Scrum or Kanban, whatever they
Yeah.
like, whatever the thing that they just like really have a strong reaction, they're probably talking about a restrictive version of that process, right? And they're probably right? They probably work in this environment that like
Yeah.
that didn't work and that was too much and they felt controlled and felt they couldn't do it. I think the idea when like talking about effectiveness is like you want to create a system that is well designed and can actually help people like achieve their best potential. And I think like the advantage of having that is that like the more you kind of like make it open, like the rules and like the process around like the team to like the people, the easier it is to like collaborate across different types of people, right? I think because like one challenge that I see now, going back to your to like what I was saying about like this not making teams effective, is that like if your team doesn't have clear rules like on how to work, and like then like the people that have like low experience,
Yeah.
low tenure, that come from underrepresented groups that just like don't have the connections to make things work, right? Like because what like a team that's not efficient usually becomes is like a team where like you need to know how things are done, and you need to
That
know,
tribal knowledge is too
yeah, the tribal
important.
knowledge is
Yeah.
important, and that like becomes like kind of like negative for like for specific groups of people. And I think like that clarifying how things work, it also helps you in like multicultural environments, right? Because
Yeah.
like when like you don't really have the social cues and kind of like the common social or cultural grounds, like
Yeah.
it's better to know and kind of like discuss
I
how things
mean,
are working.
one example is like giving feedback, right? Like in the United States, we're a pretty direct culture overall, but when it comes to giving negative feedback as a manager, you have to do this like compliment sandwich where I'm like, hey, Francisco, you're doing a really great job with your coding. Your PRs suck, they're too big, but overall, you're really doing a really great job. Whereas if I'm in Germany or the Netherlands, I can be much more direct about that potentially and say, hey, you have an issue with your PRs. Here's the problem. But depending on the makeup of the team and who your manager is, their style, and also the individual team members and the culture they come from, that could come off really badly if I'm maybe a US manager coming to the States and I try to say, "Oh, you're doing a great job about X, Y, and Z. There's this tiny issue, it's not a big deal. Oh, by the way, yeah, great job." Are they really gonna necessarily focus on that, or are they gonna say, "Oh, I'm doing a great job. That's what they told me." So, I mean, that's just one example, but there's so much there within that kind of cultural applications across teams that I think is really important to understand.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like, of course, like you have to be mindful of like cultural context and kind of like who you're working with and who your teams are. And I think that's like really important. But I think to your point, the thing is just like the more those rules are like in the open and are like
Yes.
shared and known by the team, the less confusion there is and the less kind of like problems there are. Like, and the thing, and when you talk about that, I think you think about like not only like making things explicit about how you communicate it and how often you communicate, how often you make like so that everyone understands and everyone like is on the same page, which kind of like at the end is like one of the roles of the manager, right? It's just like the leader is just
Yeah.
like kind of make sure that that process is understood by everyone. So
I feel like technical documentation gets talked a lot about, but we don't necessarily talk about how to document the working relationships and workflows within your team. And as a leader, it's super crucial that you take that approach because otherwise it's hard for new team members to come in and they have to rely on this tribal knowledge, which they don't have. And you have to rely on your onboarding process. Whereas if you can say, okay, like, here are our working agreements, here's how we approach things, here's how we resolve conflict, communicate.
yeah,
It can be a lot easier to not only onboard folks, but keep everyone on the same page moving forward together. Um,
definitely. And I think especially in a remote environment, I think that's just
oh,
like it comes
totally.
out like
Remote or
just
hybrid.
like
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like of course like it was useful I think in like when we were like at the office most of the time. I think like now it's just like it's crucial, right? Like now it's kind of like you join a company and you like literally don't know anyone and you don't meet anyone and you just like you always see is like like a computer screen or like some calls where you see some faces. Like if you don't have like that tribal knowledge that already was like a challenge, I think it becomes more of a challenge even now. And if you don't have like ways to share the knowledge more like formally or more like in the open, like it becomes really a real challenge.
Is Braze largely remote?
Braze is largely remote. We have offices and we maintain the offices and we're gonna, but like different departments kind of like pretty much manage their like remote policies. In engineering, we are pretty much like every individual just decides it's like they're
Yeah.
going to be remote or at the office.
And I'm curious how you're applying some of these concepts you're talking about within the engineering organization at Braze. What have you done to increase efficiency? What has your focus been?
I think a lot of it has been like, of course, like just like, and maybe just to clarify the Braze part, I think I manage like a part of Braze, not like the whole
Sure.
organization, of course. So like there's different. I think one thing that Braze has that I think we do quite well is that we have this kind of like we try to maintain autonomy around teams as much as possible. Of course, like with some limits, but like that means that every director has like their perspective on it and they can implement the perspective and that like helps. So teams work sometimes differently across the company. From my point of view, I think a lot of it is one is clarifying with managers that focus, right? And say, okay, the focus here is like you need to make this team effective. And like that's kind of like what we work to do. And like and that kind of is the thing that's gonna help you give you the freedom and the kind of like the context to innovate, which because I think like one aspect of like you're just like throw it out there. We can talk more about that later. But like one interesting aspect of this whole like effectiveness versus kind of like being active at creating the effective teams or not, like is that the intentions are great, right? Like it's just like if you're looking at like, or the managers and leaders that want to kind of like focus on individuals and focus on the people, they want, they, of course, like they have the intention of making those individuals like work as well as possible and like give them the freedom they want. The challenge I think I see and I say more often that I kind of think I thought I would was when that happens, like sometimes, well, you usually end up creating ineffective teams, which is kind of like
Makes
what
people
Tony,
unhappy in the
and
end.
then
Yeah.
but then like ineffective teams lead to like the company losing trust on the team and on like
Yeah.
managers, which then leads to more oversight and less freedom, right? Like so, like you kind of like by trying to create this space for individuals, you end up creating that constrained space because like now everyone's asking about like what are you doing and like what's this person doing and like how like and the reality is like in any kind of like organization, like there's enough problems to solve. So like if you can like deliver effectiveness, you're gonna create space where like you can have more autonomy and you can like and then like that means that the people in your team can have more autonomy. You can like drive that.
It's interesting you bring this up because we've talked a lot about this at Linear B lately, where we said you don't have to sacrifice efficiency and productivity for happiness. Like these should go hand in hand when done right. An example is, we released a free developer workflow automation tool to help with PR automation. And yeah, it's great for managers because it's helping PRs move faster and cycle times move faster and the team becomes more efficient. But almost more importantly, devs love it because they're like, oh, I can help automate some of the reviews I need to do on PRs, which is like a huge annoying sticking point for a lot of folks. And there's so many examples of this, right? Where, it could be that in helping improve or automate workflows for your developers and, make clear the working agreements and how you're going to apply them is going to help them be more effective because frankly, like most of us, I think as problem solvers and engineers, we're set I like coding. Like there's a reason I'm doing this job. I like solving problems. I don't want to just be on a team that's I have a lot of autonomy, but we're not doing anything. I want to solve something. I want to do something fun. And so if you can help that team workflow improve as a leader and say, okay, we're improving the workflows, we're improving how we collaborate. It's going to go a long way towards improving your team culture and happiness, which then to your point enables autonomy, enables you to take these steps you want to do.
It enables like larger challenges as well, right?
Yeah.
Just like I think like everyone, I think one thing that you can probably say about like every engineer is like they want to like solve harder and harder challenges. And the way to be given those harder challenges is to become good at like solving challenges,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just like that creates confidence and creates like space for like the team and the individuals to just like tackle larger problems and it becomes a kind of like a positive kind of like journey, I guess.
Yeah, we talk about it as this concept of compounding efficiencies. When you succeed at one thing, you can just keep compounding it on top of each other. And I think it sounds like that's something you are applying to your team at Braze as well. As like, okay, how can we build atop each thing we do?
Yeah, and I think like it's kind of I think it is how to. I mean, in the same way that I think about myself, I think about like the managers that I work with, which is just they have autonomy to work the way they want as they build effective teams, right? Like so because and I think like that is very like the compounding kind of aspect of it. I think like because if you kind of like of course if you constrain too much, then like it becomes like restrictive. But I think if I try to think about is just like align the managers around like effectiveness and like the so like I talk to my managers, the two goals that they have is just one is like build a highly productive team and build a team where like engineers are fulfilled, right? Like
Yeah,
so those are the two things that I care about and that we should care about.
great goals.
And if you're doing that, like then the rest really doesn't matter, right?
It
How
all
you
kind of
do
works
it,
out because you have these two key
yeah.
pillars. Yeah,
And how you're doing it, then like it becomes then you can explore as a
right.
manager, like what's your like style, what do you prefer, how do you achieve that, and that kind of leads to this compounding effect because like then that hopefully gives teams like the freedom to adapt to the individuals they have. Like, because there are going to be like some managers that are more technical, some managers that are less. There'll be some ICs that are going to be like more focused in like different parts and stuff. So like the moment that you have that kind of like that basic level and that trust established, and then you have autonomy within that, then it means you can experiment and you can like then compound those benefits, right? You can
Yeah.
say, okay, how can we actually become better and how can we actually achieve better results?
Well, let me ask, are you recruiting at Braze? Are you hiring right now? Or is it more of the focus is on like internal compounding of those results?
We are hiring a bit. We have like a few strategic
Okay.
roles that we're hiring, but like yeah, yeah.
And we didn't mention it at all. Do you mind for the audience just describing what Braze is and what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. So Braze is a customer engagement platform. So we kind of like help companies connect, engage with the customers. So from a technical side, I think we kind of ingest kind of like our customers, which are companies, of course, like our businesses send data, behavioral data from like their customers, and then they can build workflows to better connect to their consumers.
I'll say when I've used it, I love the customization and the improved user interface over other CRM platforms I've had to deal with. And my wife's a big fan of
That's great.
Braze. So
Great to
I
hear.
had to pitch that for you. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Francisco. This has been
Perfect.
really a fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed getting to know you a bit better and understanding how you're applying these efficiencies within your team. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I think the closing thoughts are really, I think we are seeing, I guess like I started that at the beginning of the chat, and I think like we're seeing a new kind of movement. And I think like we are seeing this, I think we're in a very interesting place in technology, right? We're seeing this like shift towards, I think, the efficiency about like how we do more with less, right? It's kind of
And
like
part
that.
of it's driven by macroeconomic
Yeah,
climate
exactly.
pieces,
Right.
sure.
Like, and I think we are like, as engineering leaders, we are like in an interesting position because there is a temptation. And I think that we're going to decide, like, we are the ones deciding which path we take, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think there's a temptation of saying, okay, well, let's go back to the old tools of like, just like get people to work harder or like, hire
Doesn't work
like
long term.
cheaper
Yeah.
people, like cheaper labor and stuff like, and that's not always the solution. I think so. I think like really thinking about, there's a lot of things that you can improve in just like focusing on how your team works and how your team efficient your team is. And I think like it's an interesting and exciting, I think, kind of like moment in the tech industry that we're living in.
Well said. I think we have a lot of potential to kind of get into a golden age of both productivity and efficiency, but also develop happiness and developer experiencing their job in a positive way. And I
Yeah.
love the direction we're taking. And I know it's definitely a goal for us at Linear B and Dev Interrupted is to enable that. So thank you so much for coming on. And I'll say for anyone listening, if you found this conversation valuable, you took some nugget away from it, we'd really appreciate if you give a little value back and just give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Hope everyone has a great week and thanks for tuning in.